Welcome everyone to Poetry with Inaugural Wordsmith, Gianna Russo. I'm Becky and I'm a librarian here from Hillsborough County. I'm here today with my co-host Daniel.
Hi, good evening.
Right, and we're also here with our presenter, Gianna Russo.
Hi, everybody.
Before we officially get started, I do want to let people know that you can go put your questions at any time. We would love to hear your thoughts and questions for Gianna. At this time, I am going to hand things over to Daniel to go and get us officially started.
Okay, hi everyone. So, as you might already know, Gianna is a poet, a writer, an editor, and a teacher. She's the author of the poetry collections Moonflower, One House Down, with photographer Jenny Carey. All I See Is Your Glinting, that's this one. She's also the author of the chapbooks Companion of Joy, with photographer Laurie Ballard, In the Late Day Sun, and her poetry has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. It's appeared in the Tampa Review, Crab Orchard Review, Florida View, Florida Humanities Council Forum, Karamu, the Bloomsbury Review, The Sun, Poet Law, MacGuffin, Calyx, and others, in addition to several anthologies. Her non-fiction essays have been published in Tampa Bay Times, and she also contributed a chapter to the collaborative novel 15 Views of Tampa Bay. As she's a fellow of the CERTA Foundation, the Hambridge Centre for Arts and Sciences. She's an arts teacher fellowship that allowed her to go to Italy Writers Workshop, where she worked with poets there. She also received a Hillsborough County Artist Fellowship, Emerging Artists Grant, an honourable mention for the Florida Artist Fellowship. She's the founder of Yellow Jacket Press, Florida's only publisher of poetry chapbook manuscripts, and she's a lifelong resident of Tampa, and you might know that she is Tampa's inaugural wordsmith as well, or just wrapped up being Tampa's inaugural wordsmith. So I will leave it to you, Gianna.
Hi, Daniel, thank you. Hi, Rebecca, thank you. And thank you to those of you that are joining us. I'm so happy to be able to share poetry with you and talk with you about my role as wordsmith and find out the sorts of things that you all are interested in. So I guess I have a question for you that if you feel like you could jot it into the chat box is who are your favorite poets? So happy National Poetry Month. Of course, we celebrate all month long. And as I was thinking about some of the poems that I wanted to read tonight, I thought, well, there are a couple of things that this month is known for, a couple of really positive things. One is National Poetry Month, and one is that we celebrate Earth Day later in the month, and I'm an avid gardener. So the poems that I picked, I don't have a lot of poems that reference poetry, but I have some poems that reference the creative process, and I have a number of poems that reference the natural world. And so those are the poems that I picked for us for tonight. So I want to start with poems from, oh, here we go. I'm trying to see how you can see it best. This is my latest book, which came out at the beginning of last year. It's called All I See Is Your Glinting, and the photographs are by my friend, the Tampa photographer, Jenny Carey. This book, the subtitle is 90 Days in the Pandemic. It was written at the end of 2020, and I was actually on a sabbatical from my teaching position at St. Leo University, and I had proposed a different sabbatical project, but because of everything that was going on that year, I found that when it was time to start writing that project, I really was having a hard time doing it. And I kind of panicked, and then I decided, let me just start writing some poems that are in my mind, I came up with the phrase that I had heard before, these poems that would maybe be too small to fail, poems that I didn't need to put a lot of emotional investment into, but just to get something on the paper. And so those are the poems that filled this book. I ended up writing little small poems, and they've been described as haiku-like. Some of them are almost as small as haiku, but I wrote for 100 days in a row, and I started in October, fall of that year. I started October 1st, and I finished in the early part of January of the next year. And then I went through and picked the 90 best ones, and those are the ones that appear in the book, and they appear chronologically. I will tell you a little bit about the form. I'm not sure how many poetry geeks are out there, but since you're tuning in on a Monday night, maybe all of you are poetry geeks like me, so that would be great. I created this form. I call it the daily, and what I decided to do was limit my word count. And so I took the number for the month, and again, I started in October, so that was 10, and the number for the day, which was 1, and I added them together, and that was 11. So I started off with an 11-word poem. The next day, it was a 12-word, 13, 14, and I went all the way through the month. And as I said, I did that for 100 days. So I have poems that throughout the month increasingly get a little bit longer, but none of them are very long at all. And it's a really fun form, and a lot of people have told me that they've tried it. So if you like to write and you want something that's sort of low stakes, that might be a fun way to go. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of poems from All I See Is Your Glinting. And again, they're very short and small. So, and they're not titled. I simply put in the date that I wrote them. This one is 10/25. Cutting back bleeding heart, I mourn the jumble it once was. Its valentines like living bonbons cascading in cherry and cream. Now neglected branches scrape my arms. Regret's scrawny limbs scratch me from the root. And then kind of a companion piece in a way is this piece from 10/22. Blue jays, finches, Carolina wrens worry all morning, piping out torrents of warnings and commands. It's just me, moving blue porterweed from cloud to sky, just me, sweating in ragged buttercup mansions. And then one of the pieces that references creativity and flow. Some of you might know the idea of flow, that when you're really into something, you kind of lose track of everything else and just go with that creative moment. Chalk scribbles on the porch floor remind me how art can enchant us. The world is all pewter coins, razors, ashes. Flow transforms all that into roses, brooches of silvered joy. There's another art poem that is set on Christmas Day, or the day after Christmas rather. So this is 12/26. Christmas Day is over, but our spirits still want filling. At the art museum, self-portraits crowd the walls, urging us to consider our alter egos. I'm not sure about mine. Her guarded eyes, hands clutching dad's watch, ink pen, flailing butterfly. So those are just a few small pieces from All I See Is Your Glinting. And now I want to read a few pieces from One House Down. And Daniel and I were talking earlier about the fact that this poem is very, well, it's a Tampa book. I call it sort of a love poem to Tampa. I'm a native, but I've lived in Seminole Heights for 27 years. And for those of you who have been in Tampa, you know that Seminole Heights has really undergone a kind of an amazing transformation. When we first moved in here, it was a pretty risky neighborhood. There was a lot of crime. There was prostitution. There were people living on the streets. it was not really a desirable neighborhood, even though it is, I think, the second oldest neighborhood in Tampa, and it was founded in the early 1920s, about 100 years ago. And it was founded at that time as a very respectable middle-class neighborhood. So when we moved in here 27 years ago, as I say, it was a little bit of a shaky neighborhood, but I've watched it really be transformed and revitalized, and I've really enjoyed that. But there's still some rough edges, and actually, I really kind of like those rough edges. I don't want everything smooth and you know, manicured. I like a little grittiness. So I'm going to read some poems for you. I did want to tell you about I wish I could, there we go. I want you to see the cover. This is a manipulated photograph from the very well-known Burgert Brothers collection of photos, which is archived at the Hillsborough County Public Library online. And the Burgert Brothers, many of you may know this, they were a photography team, and they basically documented the establishment of Tampa as, you know, as a city, as an up-and-coming city. So they were taking photographs from about the turn of the 20th century up into the 50s. And I'm fascinated by those photographs, and I'm fascinated by the history of our city. And so a number of those Burgert brother photos are in the book to accompany poems. I think there's about 25 of them. This one is so cool because this is a house that is in Seminole Heights. I'm trying to get it there for you. There we go. It's a house in Seminole Heights, and it's on Central Avenue. It's not that far from the Seminole Heights Library. And if you drive by Central and you look for it, you can see quite clearly that, you know, this is the same house. And maybe I'll read you the poem about this particular house because I'm sort of in love with it and enchanted by it. But I'm going to start with a couple of other poems first. So again, because the neighborhood is a little bit gritty, there are a lot of poems in here that are kind of they deal with difficult subject matter. I really wanted to address also, besides Tampa, I want to address sort of the legacy of the South. And, you know, one of those is entrenched racism that has been part of the legacy of the South forever. So there are a bunch of poems on that. There are poems on gun violence. There are poems on income inequality. There are a lot of poems that are really trying to engage with what's going on in the world, some of the things that aren't so great. But I picked out for today things that I think are a lot more positive. That was a lot of an introduction. I hope you'll forgive me for that. Okay, I'm going to start with this one, a nature poem, and it's called Memory in Green. And it really is, it kind of tells the story of my childhood neighborhood where we were outside all the time. And it references a flash at sunset. I don't know if any of y'all have heard that old tale that if you see a flash of green at sunset over the Gulf, then you're going to have good luck. And I've always looked for it. I've never seen it. Flash at sunset, I've never seen over the Gulf. Rain trudging up from the Atlantic. High grass in the yards on Ferris Drive and green light of kickball games just before dusk. Voice of the whippoorwill, the bobwhite. Putrid belly of a dead frog in the road and the kid we blindfolded and made step in it. We were that ugly. Duckweed smothering the old ditch. Live oak with the sap green leaves where we swayed above the bad neighbor's yard, made up stories, and practiced kissing. Green gold canes of the cracker roses lost to the yard man, the lawn boy, and dark green whip of night blooming cereus, that stuck itself to the magnolia tree and flowered like New Year's Eve. Verdigris wings of the dragonflies, milk green of the evening moths, rain like a woodblock print, horizontal, in ragged hurricane colors, and the gray-green of the eye, flash at sunset like the luck I never spied. So that's Memory in Green, where I was really trying to riff on green as many ways as I could. I hope you picked up on that. Okay, the next poem that I want to read for you from One House Down. Well, I mentioned the bad neighbor in that last poem. This is another bad neighbor, but it's not the same one. It's called The Next Door Neighbor. And I'm sure many of you have had next door neighbors like this. I hope not for very long though. The next door neighbor. 2 a.m. work nights, they would slam down aces. He and the other stringers playing poker at his rusted picnic table just beyond our bedroom window. His black glasses crooked, he'd knock back rye whiskey, smoke his stupid cigars. We'd stumble over sleep rumpled, plead early alarms. He never said a word, let the other men mutter or chuckle. Once one of them shouted, "Sword man!" and bent deep into his car trunk until we sidled home. Other nights, he was in his shop, blasting REM at 3:30. We'd turn our bedroom blinds to slits, glare towards the hammering light and thrashing yard. Christmas, he tried hanging lights. Before we stopped saying hello, we would have helped, but when we called up the ladder, just the back of his head was his reply. When he first moved in, he'd had a lover. She refinished the doors, painted murals on the walls. She laid a dead osprey in the driveway, photographed it for art. Then he sold her things while she visited her mother. They argued so bad, he kicked in glass on his own front door. All December, the panes gaped, blank as a new notebook. Even the postman asked me about it. Clothes strewn in the ditch, shadows on his porch. She took one dog and left. The other he let howl so long, the chain link fence shuddered. He still owns the house, but he's mostly gone. The house molders. We saw her at the art show. Her photo stared when she sidled up asking, "How is that bad neighbor?" So there's the bad neighbor for you. Okay. Now I think I'm going to read another kind of neighborhood piece. And it's set at San Juan Grocery. I don't know if any of you all shop there, but I love that place. It's on Hillsborough Avenue, almost by the train tracks, right on the train tracks, actually, 22nd Street. And going in there is an international experience. I mean, it really is. There are people from every culture shopping in there, and the produce it's unusual. There are lots of things, you would never see at a Publix that are at San Juan. And that's one of the reasons I love it. So this piece has two parts. And the first part of it is a praise poem where I just give thanks for the people that work at San Juan Grocery. And then the second part sort of catalogs all the different people I see in there. So San Juan International Grocery. Praise to the cart boys, how they corral the runaways drifting towards 4 lanes of traffic on Hillsborough Avenue. Praise how they trudge to the back lot for the once overloaded, now abandoned. Praised how deftly they cue them up, tucking each into the next like balls into joints. Praise how they push the heavy line up the incline towards the loading dock, how they maneuver the hairpin turn. I want to say something magnificent about their green t-shirts emblazoned with the orange name. Praise how they heave and push towards the plastic flaps covering the doors, how they clap together their black work gloves as if calling forth the magic of dragon fruit, celery root, tomatoes on the vines. Part 2. I see a woman in African dress examining prickly pears. Her breasts are bound tight with a sash. A man in a green kilt rubs chalk from the winter melons. Women in turquoise saris peruse the silken tofu. A Vietnamese family inspects dried lily, lotus root. Cubans crowd the yucca. A Chinese gent grabs okra long as a bat. A lady in hijab wafts around the lentils. The sugar canes lean together in their bin, deciphering all the languages. What is carnival cauliflower? How do you cook banana blossom? I am searching for farro and eggplant. Take me, says the cactus paddle. Take me, says the stinky durian. No us, say stars of rambutan. When the African woman bends to the fruit, I see her back, her baby asleep in the binding cloth. Okay, I want to read for you that little poem that I promised you, and then maybe if you've got some questions, I'd be happy to talk about those and maybe read a couple more poems, but please do submit some questions. Okay, let me show you if I can. Can I? There's the house again. That's the one that's on the front cover that was manipulated by my cover designer, who happens to be my husband, Jeff Carone. But there's the house on Central. And I don't know if you can tell, maybe on the front you can. There's a woman standing right there. And she's, you know, it's pretty cool. I wonder what happened to her, what her life was like. So this is Bungalow 5610 Branch Avenue, 1922. She's standing there like a ghost, but really it was her house first. Those cabbage palms, bougainvillea, white gardenia, beauty bush. Her crone of a house wreathed in cracker rose. Now, sand spurs, boarded up windows, a locked door. But I'm happy to report that after I wrote this poem and saw the house looking like that, somebody bought that house and has put new life into it. So I'm quite thrilled about that. I wanted to mention, I am going to read one more poem from this book, but before I do that, since we're talking about the Burgert brothers, I wanted to mention this little book that I compiled and edited. I can't get straight on this. Compiled and edited for the library. It's called Chasing Light. And the whole book is poetry that is based on the Burgert brothers' photographs. And it was a fantastic project. I loved it. This is, of course, one of their photos on the front. And what happened was I invited a bunch of poets, a bunch of Florida poets, to go through the Burgert brothers photos and pick out a photo that they really liked and then to write a poem about it. And I think there are about 50 poems with the corresponding photos in this book, Chasing Light. And the library has copies of this. I don't know if they're selling them or if they're only lending them out. But I did hear from a friend just last week that she saw these at her branch. So I hope you'll get a chance to look at Chasing Light. Okay, the last poem I'm going to read, if we have some questions, and maybe, you know, Rebecca or Daniel have questions, but I'm going to read a poem called Balancing, Truing, and Personal Service. Now, for those of you who are poets, one of the things that I did for this book that you might enjoy doing is I had my husband drive me around town, and specifically down Florida Avenue, Central Avenue, downtown, and down Nebraska Avenue. And as we drove, I just took note of signage, because I thought some of this signage can really be worked into a poem, or that it could work as a title. And it also, you know, I use so many of those signs. I've got one poem in here, Nebraska Avenue Torch Song, that has a lot of that signage verbiage in it. And so this one, Balancing Truing and Personal Service, that is a sign at a tire balancing mechanic shop. And so you'll see what I did with it. This poem is after a poem by Mary Oliver. Anyway, Balancing Truing and Personal Service. This evening, the first perfume of Confederate jasmine is preparing to set us right. As the moon lifts and loosens the buds with her curved white wrench, and they hum an idling song, ivory and green, while all night the street sounds lurch over them, the thunderous mufflers, the bed-shaking bass, the sirens screeching up the highway to their frightened, breathless scenes. And all night, inside a springtime thrum, as in an ode to the great wheel, the song veers over our flat, sleeping streets. And jasmine hums along all the fences, unmuffled and steady. And the song is one ode to the big rotation, the harmony asking without wobble or shudder, what world do you want? And will you wake amidst the moony drone, the fragrant purring, the pumping streets? Will you wake and drive your life into the answer? So that's Balancing Truing and Personal Service. I'm not seeing any questions, which is a bit of a disappointment. But there's Rebecca.
We actually have a few questions, actually. You might just not be seeing them. Yeah, we've got a few.
Great.
We'll get to them actually in a minute. Let me give people a little more time to go and work on them. In the meantime, let me just go to our next slide. All right, Daniel, are you there?
I am, yes.
All right, perfect. You want to go over our library resource here? Well, okay, well, while you're pulling that up, actually, I have the poll that Gianna, you had asked me to go and ask people if they're poets or aspiring. So let's go and launch the poll. So you guys can go ahead and let us know if you want to be poets, if you're yes, no, not sure.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, cool. We're getting a good mix. Okay, give another few seconds. All right. Let's see, 78% of you have voted. All right, I will call it. So it looks like 71% of you said yes, you are poets. That's awesome. 14% said no, that's fine, still fans of poetry. And 14% are not sure if they're poets or not.
That's great. Oh, that's so wonderful.
So thank you everybody for sharing. I appreciate that. It's great to know we have lots of aspiring and hopefully current poets. Okay, there we go.
Okay, let's see. Oh yeah, so all right, for additional library resources, this is our shout out, of course. If you have Libby, if you don't have Libby, you need to get Libby, okay? All you need is your library card and your PIN, and you can check out our massive Hillsborough County collection, including Gianna's book, One House Down, which is out on Libby as well.
Or of course you can get it in person.
I'll just put this out there. My publisher is Madville Publishing, and I would certainly recommend checking out from the library first. But if you decide you want to own a copy, you can go on to Madville Publishing and buy it directly from my publisher.
All right, perfect. All right, oop, there it goes.
Okay, and for your inspiration, I recommend checking out our digital collections. Some of the photographic collections and art collections we have, these are all available online. So you can get on to digitalcollections.hcplc.org and check out the Burgett Brothers collection. It's searchable, it's all indexed, it's all online. There's lots of beautiful and inspiring pictures from Tampa's history to check out on there. And we also have the library's art collection, the Tampa Hillsborough County Public Library art and artifact collection. That's all viewable online as well. So these are great places for you to find inspiration from your poetry as well.
All right, so let's get to those questions. Daniel, do you want to start first or do you want me to start?
Sure. I have the viewer questions here.
Okay, perfect. Oh yeah, we have a lot of questions actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So one of our participants asks, from your perspective as a teacher, why is it so difficult to create effective high school teaching curriculum for poetry that will make poetry education more than just student agony?
Wow. I'm wondering if that's a teacher asking, or is it just someone who is curious? That's a kind of a big question. I created the creative writing curriculum for Blake High School when it reopened as a magnet school in 1997. And that was a 12-course curriculum. And I think maybe because I'm a poet and my co-teacher at the time was a writer, we didn't really find it that difficult. I mean, we looked at the state guidelines and the certain benchmarks that we had to meet. And then we just thought, hey, let's do some fun stuff. To me, it's all about having fun. It's not about testing. It just isn't. It's about having fun. It's about solving the puzzle of, not the puzzle of poetry, but the puzzle of reading comprehension. And that could be across the board anything. I don't know if that's answering your question, but, I think demanding that students have a particular interpretation of something and not allowing for a breadth of experience and interpretation, maybe that is a little off-putting to students. My main requirement in how to interpret something is there any support in the text? If you're saying it's about a black cat, but there's no cat anywhere to be found and there's no hint of a cat, then it's not about a black cat, okay? You can't just say it's about anything. But other than that, I mean, it's pretty wide open. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was my experience. And if you're a teacher, please go ahead and email me. We can continue the conversation. I'd be happy to help.
Thanks. And one of our aspiring wordsmiths asks, do you have any advice for how to get published?
Yes, I do, actually. The first thing is to go online to the Poets and Writers. One of our professional organizations is called Poets and Writers, and they publish a magazine called Poets and Writers. You can Google them and you can go online. When you go onto the online, if you look at their resources, there will be a tab that says something like publishing your work or sharing your work or something like that. And you can look at that tab and there literally are hundreds and hundreds of magazines that are looking for poetry. I highly recommend that unless you're self-publishing, which is absolutely a valid way to go, but it costs money on your part. If you want to get published by a publisher, I highly recommend that you publish individual poems first. And then when you send your manuscript, it's almost like it's already been vetted by a bunch of other publishers because a bunch of other people have taken individual poems. And so that's my short answer. I teach a whole class on this. And so, there's a lot more that I could say about it, but that would be my short answer.
Great to know. Another viewer asks, what are the duties that you performed as Tampa's wordsmith?
Well, it was a 2-year appointment and it ended in September of last year. So I had been it for 2 years, which was interesting because it was, during COVID and didn't really get to do as many public sort of things as I wanted to. But some of the things that I did do, I wrote occasional poems for specific occasions. For example, there was an art piece that was dedicated at a park, and I wrote a piece for that dedication. I wrote a piece for the mayor when she was given an award by an organization. I went to a number of different community centers and had little poetry workshops there. I ran a couple of contests, citywide contests. Some of you may have known about those, where we solicited poems from all over the city. Anybody could enter it, and some of those poems got put on a piece of artwork that is traveling the city. It's called the Poetry Post, and it has lines from particular poems from people all over the city. So the whole point was to try to connect people and neighborhoods and connect to people through literature, through the written word, and the fun and the joy of it. And I had a great time doing it. I really did.
Okay, I think this is a really good question, and this is, how do you know when a poem is finished or ready to be submitted?
That is such a great question. Well, one of my beloved mentors is Peter Meinke, and some of you all may know that he was formerly the Poet Laureate of Florida. And Peter's advice about finishing a poem was finish the poem, put it in a drawer, and let it sit for a month, and don't look at it, and then come back and look at it. And by that time, you're kind of emotionally uncoupled from the poem so that you can see it a little more clearly. And that's one little tip. But Peter also has said that poems satisfy when they're ending correctly, when they're really finished, they satisfy, and that ending feels sort of inevitable, like, oh yeah, this is definitely the way the poem had to end. I don't really know how to say how to train to recognize that, except through practice. That's the only way I know that you can train to recognize that sense of satisfaction and inevitability. But putting the poem away maybe helps you make that leap a little bit, a little bit easier, a little bit quicker in a way. So I hope that's a good answer for whoever that poet is out there, one of our poets.
Okay, and another poetic question. They say, good afternoon, Mrs. Russo. I wanted to know if you have ever encountered writer's block or resistance, and do you have any tips for navigating writer's block?
Yes, I have. I have 2 sons who are now full-fledged grown adults, but when they were born 2 years apart. And from the time my first son was born, and then my second was 2 years later, I didn't write for 7 years. And I met someone who said to me, a man who said to me, if you're not writing every day, you're not a real poet. And unfortunately, I took that to heart, and that made that writer's block even longer than it was. I've actually been in a little bit of a funk myself just lately. I would say in the last 6 months. Like, a part of it is not having sort of a bigger project to work on, and so I feel like I'm a little bit at sea. I'm writing, but I don't feel completely in the groove. I think the best advice is something that I use, and it is to set a timer. And I usually set it for 20 minutes. Set a timer and allow yourself to write anything that comes out, and do not censor yourself as you're in that 20 minutes, and do not correct or edit. Just write anything that comes out. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be grammatically correct. You're just kind of putting raw material on the page, almost like a potter throwing raw clay down on a potter's wheel. You've got to get that raw stuff down there. After the 20 minutes is over, you might feel like continuing to write because you might have actually gotten past that first little roadblock. That is what, you know, that's what gets most of us, is that first little getting going. And then you can go back and you can look at this real raw material and see if there's anything there that can be salvaged. Did you start anything? Are there a few lines? Is there an idea? And then the next day, 20 more minutes or even 10 minutes. I mean, go small, make it too small to fail, and then try it again. And that has really helped me a lot over the years, and it's helping me these days too, when I feel a little bit out of sorts.
Okay, we have two more questions here, and even though they're very different, I might give them both to you at once.
Yeah, great.
We're running well on time, I think.
Yeah.
So one viewer asks, I grew up in Seminole Heights and the poems painted a really nice picture of the area. What makes the diversity of the area so appealing to you? And second question is, are you currently working on another collection of poetry, and do you know what the subject might be?
Oh, okay. Let me take the second question first. I think I am not consciously working on another collection, but I want to be. And I think I'm either because I've got some poems about this. I'm either heading towards poems that deal with the ruining of our natural world. I told you I'm an avid gardener, and I'm very concerned about climate change, and I'm very concerned about everything that's happening. And I've been writing a number of poems about that. So I'm thinking that that's kind of where the next area is gonna be. But I'm not consciously working on it yet. I still just have maybe a handful of poems. Seminole Heights, what attracts me to the diversity? I'm a person who likes new experiences, and I'm not fearful of I'm not fearful of people who are different. I'm not, you know, it's probably being a teacher. I've been a teacher for 40 years. I've had to deal with every sort of human really imaginable. And I find a certain amount of excitement and fun in all of that. And I think that that's why I like living in a place like Seminole Heights, as opposed to maybe, you know, like a gated community. I just like it. Every day there's something where I go, oh, hey, did you hear about that? Did you see that? Wow. You know, anyway, I find it kind of fun. Thank you for those questions. You guys are wonderful. And I wish I knew who you were, but feel free to say hello on Facebook or Instagram, or if you leave a message on the website, I'll get back with you. And thank you so much to Hillsborough County Public Library for having me. One of my very first jobs was at a library. I was a cataloger, and my sister made her career at Hillsborough County for 40 years. So we're huge appreciators of librarians and of the library. And I want to thank Rebecca and Daniel for having me, and all of y'all for coming.
All right, yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, those were great questions, everybody. I really appreciate everybody submitting those so quickly and easily. You guys were a great audience, and we're so happy you were able here to join us today, our audience members and Gianna. And just if you guys want to contact the library, it's at hcplc.org/contact, or you can call us at 813-273-3652, or you can go and reach out to Gianna as well. Her website is russo15@wordpress.com. She's on Instagram as Gianna Russo15, and Facebook at gianna.russo. And if you want to check out more library programs, those are at hcplc.org/events. This was a great way to spend my evening. I had fun with all of you. I hope you did as well.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.